If you've played FPS games before, you've probably heard the age-old advice that sticking to one sensitivity is good, while changing your sensitivity will in fact ruin your aim. The idea here is that playing on the same settings will make you more consistent with your aim over time. Through sheer repetition alone, your brain gradually internalizes the amount of force required to flick to a target, thereby allowing you to land instant headshots every single time. This may sound good on paper, but following this logic, the moment we deviate from our original sensitivity, all that muscle memory we built up is instantly thrown out of the window. All of a sudden, we lose our ability to aim. This not only applies to our in-game sensitivity, but the equipment we use as well. But if all this is really true, then why is it that some players can afford to change their settings and peripherals all the time, while still staying at the top of their game? The truth is, muscle memory is probably the biggest myth there is when it comes to aiming.
Huh?
So, I know what you might be thinking. If muscle memory is really a myth, then why is it that our aim gets worse every time we change our sensitivity? Why do people even bother sticking to one sensitivity in the first place? And more importantly, why is making this distinction such a big deal? Okay, so maybe I lied. Muscle memory isn't entirely a myth. It's more of a misrepresentation of what is actually going on. Before we continue, I think it's important to define what muscle memory really is. According to Wikipedia, muscle memory involves consolidating a specific motor task into memory through repetition, eventually allowing it to be performed with little to no conscious effort. A day-to-day example would be unlocking your phone, for instance. Because of how many times the motion is repeated, you can probably unlock your phone without so much as a glance. This also applies to tying your laces, riding a bicycle, as well as touch typing on a keyboard. And speaking of keyboards, what better keyboard to use than the Immersion A3 gaming keyboard designed by Hexgears, the world's first low-profile, hot-swappable mechanical gaming keyboard. With a sturdy frame built from aircraft-grade aluminum alloy, you can be assured that this keyboard is ready for the most intense of gaming sessions. The low-profile switches, which are half the height of regular mechanical switches, offer faster speeds, precision, and performance. Oh, and did I mention hot-swappable? Additionally, the full key rollover ensures that every key press is registered, enabling complex gaming operations and smoother gameplay. But that's not all! Probably my favorite feature of this keyboard is the fact that it offers tri-mode connectivity. For the workplace, you can pair up to 3 devices via Bluetooth for a clean and simple setup. For gaming, use the provided dongle or a Type-C cable to enjoy the most rapid response times. If you're interested in getting one for yourself, click on the link in the description and use my code for an additional 20% off your order. Once again, shout out to Hexgears for sponsoring today's video. So if muscle memory can be applied in other day-to-day tasks, why isn't it possible to commit our mouse movements to memory? For starters, factors such as humidity, how worn out your skates are, and even your positioning all play a sizable role in understanding how our sensitivity affects our aim. Just think about all the tiny dust particles that a cloth pad inevitably collects over time. Because of this, the glide and friction of our mouse pad can wildly vary on a day-to-day basis. If we are unable to keep these variables constant, then it should be impossible to memorize the exact distance needed to flick to a target. So by extension, this disproves the idea that we are able to commit our mouse movements to memory. So going back to what we talked about in the beginning, if muscle memory doesn't apply to aiming, why is it that our aim gets worse right after we change our sensitivity? There's actually an article by Voltaic.gg that gets commonly referenced within these circles of discussion. If you're interested in reading this in its entirety, feel free to check out the link in the description below. But for now, I'd like you to focus your attention on this short excerpt. While playing on a given sensitivity, you gain a general sense of the relationship between the motion of your mouse and your view in-game. Importantly, you are also building a dependency on the relationship between how you use the parts of your arm to achieve these motions. These aspects result in the sensitivity becoming more comfortable to use, as you are never surprised by the results of your input and the extent to which you need to utilize parts of your arm. As a result, people will then tend to get scared off by changing their sensitivity as they lose the familiarity it has to them, which is compounded by having to adapt to performing various types of motions with parts of their arm they aren't used to. For instance, when we're playing on a lower sensitivity, we tend to use more of our arm for those bigger movements while making those smaller adjustments with our wrist. A higher sensitivity gives you a much bigger range of motion with your wrist, while your arm is generally reserved for those rapid directional changes. For most players, switching between the two may require a short adjustment period. Despite this, there has been a wealth of both scientific and anecdotal evidence to suggest that frequent changes to your sensitivity can in fact help you to improve your aim at a much faster rate. Sensitivity randomization is just an example of what is known as differential learning in the field of cognitive science. Essentially, having to constantly adjust to a new sensitivity reinforces neural pathways related to aiming. Over time, this can lead to faster reaction times and improved aiming mechanics. But even if our aim is mostly governed by fine motor control, why not just play on the same sensitivity anyway? For starters, different games tend to emphasize different mechanics depending on their nature. In Valorant, since engagements often involve holding angles and landing headshots with minimal movement, a lower sensitivity allows for finer adjustments and more consistency. A game like Apex would involve tracking fast-moving targets and rapid directional changes, making a higher sensitivity optimal in most cases. And since we know that muscle memory isn't tied to aim, there is virtually no good reason to restrict yourself to the same sensitivity. Instead, it's better to play on the settings that make the most sense depending on the game that you're playing. The same logic applies for roles within games. In most hero shooters, for instance, it's fairly common to have different settings for different characters, because the playstyle of each character tends to vary heavily. In Valorant, some players even change their sensitivity depending on whether they're attacking or defending. In short, it all comes down to personal preference as well as the context of the game. Now, let's talk about when you shouldn't change your sensitivity. From my experience, a lot of players tend to change their sensitivity right after dying in-game. If you find yourself performing poorly, the issue probably lies on a deeper level and cannot be fixed by changing a single number. I would only recommend changing your sensitivity during practice to work on various aspects of your aim, while keeping it the same during actual matches. Once again, shout out to Hexgears for sponsoring. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.